Hello everyone, welcome back to Horror Convos, a casual, relaxing, and occasionally funny podcast where we choose one topic per episode and discuss any media related to it that we want. Movies, series, books, video games, radio dramas, nothing is off limits here. I give my personal history, thoughts, and opinions on the chosen subject, and we often have guests join in to share theirs. There's hence the title, Horror Convos.
No shit.
We also hold regular polls for you to vote on what topic is covered in our Patreon exclusive For the Fans episodes. If advertisements give you the urge to spontaneously commit familicide, you can enjoy the full podcast ad-free on Patreon, along with other exclusive content. Horror Convos is available to listen to on YouTube, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Be sure to like, subscribe, and pin that notification bell with the nearest sharp object so you never miss when our newest content is uploaded. If you need a little extra help, we'll add a bell-shaped constellation in the sky to summon you. Yes, we have the budget to do that now, and all it took was a small slashing of our employees' health, insurance, dental, retirement, other benefits. The podcast is worth it.
Bullshit.
I'm your host, Keith Harris, and today is our first edition of what will be a new recurring subject, franchises. From the highs and lows to the blockbusters and bombs, peaks and valleys, household names, and diamonds in the rough that grew cult followings over time, we will be dissecting the history of a chosen horror franchise, comparing our personal experiences with it, and examining the path it took from the good to the bad and the... That's right, our debut franchise for this topic is none other than that of everyone's favorite serial killer whose name would follow a certain comedian like an unshakable itch on balls for decades. Halloween.
Yeah, baby, yeah! No, we are not resorting to that.
And joining me for this deep dive is self-proclaimed world-renowned Halloween expert. Do not look up his credentials, just take my word at face value. Alfonso.
Spoiler alert!
So, Alfonso, why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with the Halloween franchise and how you first got into it?
Oh, man. So we're going back about 4 years now. So this would have been during the year that I think a lot of people like to forget about, 2020. And how I got into it was I had one of my cohort members, a friend. I'm going to give a shout out to him, Derek Pearson. Originally, he's from Connecticut. If you ever listen to this, Derek, I got to thank you so much for giving me this, making this all possible. So one day after one of our classes, we just kind of got to talking over Zoom, me and him, just a little bit about horror movies. One of the biggest things I brought this up was why Michael Myers could never die. And I know that is an often debated topic amongst fans and casual moviegoers alike about one of the most infamous horror icons of all time. And I knew before 2020 about what I'm going to talk about, deep dive tonight, the producer's cut, Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. And I knew that there was a supernatural backstory within that film which explained how he could never die, why he could never die, and why he kept coming back. It gave a lot of motivation and backstory to his character that is very controversial, and I'm probably going to explain that in a little bit of why that a lot of fans do not like that, but I argue the opposite. So it's been about 4 years, and along these last 4 years, I've kind of culminated to the biggest thing for me out of that is the fact that Michael had a guardian in Dr. Terrence Wynn, who was a minor character in the first film by John Carpenter. He is seen in a short scene when Loomis and him are walking outside of Smith's Grove. Loomis is going to go to his car to drive to Haddonfield, and they have a little bit of an argument. And, what's kind of funny is when Wynn is trying to calm Loomis down and tell him, for God's sakes, he can't drive a car. And Loomis responds with, well, he was doing very well last night. And Where I come in is, oh my gosh, if you only had the idea of who was responsible for all that, the guy right next to you. I'm going to go with that. So the fact, and the reason why that for me stands out most of all than the backstory is you rarely see in horror films where the killer or monster has a protector, has a guardian, has somebody watching over them. That makes it very unique. I mean, another example would be Haggis the Witch from Pumpkinhead, right? And more recently, in the last few years, in some media, like Resident Evil 8, Lady Dimitrescu and her witch daughters. She was a guardian to them. That is another example. I love Lady Dimitrescu and her witch daughters. They're so iconic. But yeah, Dr. Wynn, he was amazing. And I am heartily going to defend that. I mean, my passion is so strong for that earlier this year when I had an outpatient surgical procedure, when I woke up, the first thing I said was, Dr. Wynn was Michael Myers' guardian, and one of my nurses who was attending to me said that I could watch horror films later, and that is that is an example of my strong devotion to this, Keith. That the backstory is second to me. I mean, but what most important to me is the guardianship, and it makes so much sense. It explains so much, and I have come up so far. I've done my research those last 4 years that the Celtic mythology and the history of the Druids are fundamental to understanding the backstory that was featured in the unrated producer's cut of Halloween 6. And what Dr. Wynn represents is another supernatural element, because he mirrors a figure from Celtic mythology called the Dark Man. And you can see that by the outfit he donned in Halloween 5 and 6, the black fedora hat and duster jacket. And I'm gonna go a little bit talking about them more later on, but I hope that explains. It's been about 4 years now, 4 years strong, and actually next year, hopefully, plan to get my own podcast going to talk about this, but also Jurassic Park. That is another favorite fandom of mine. I have some opinions about that too.
Didn't I tell you this guy was the foremost authority on the lore? Or did I not tell you? That's really cool. Well, yeah, you don't hear of a lot of, at least in my anecdotal experience, like you don't hear about a lot of Halloween fans that come in at that point in the franchise. But it's definitely interesting to hear like different generations of fans who came in at different points. I mean, there's so many films at this point. I mean, that was inevitably going to happen over time. My backstory with the franchise is not nearly as interesting. I mean, I was born in 1991, and so I grew up more so with the sequels. I don't believe the original was the first one I saw. I was aware of it. I'm sure I'd seen pieces of it on TV. Yeah, I knew the Michael Myers character from a standpoint of, okay, so that's what he looks like. And I, like a lot of people, I got him mixed up with Mike Myers multiple times. That's one of my favorite Robot Chicken sketches, is when they directly like address that. It's one of the biggest laughs I got out of that show back when it was still funny. My earliest memory with the franchise is probably a mix of part 2, then the original at some point after that, and then the Thorn trilogy starting with Halloween 4. 4 is in some ways my favorite of the sequels. If I had to pick a top 3 out of the entire franchise, and in terms of what I think works together best as a definitive beginning, middle, and end for the franchise, I personally would have probably composed it as a trilogy of the 1978 original, part 4, if you could make it more of a direct continuation, and with Jamie Lee Curtis at least having some involvement in it, or visually appearing in more than just a photo, I guess. And then H2O, Halloween 20 years later. which, I would have wanted to incorporate, Jamie Lloyd back into again, in either alongside or perhaps as a replacement for Laurie's son. And it's just, I think that could have worked as a perfect trilogy for the story. Yeah, if they had, if it hadn't been for certain decisions behind the scenes, from production to writing, I have a lot of respect for Mustafa Akkad in terms of his passion for the Michael Myers character and the direct role he played in helping the franchise to exist in the first place, like not just as a producer, but with his creative input and his relationship to John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. Oh, and of course his son, and who is essentially serving to continue his legacy in some respects. I've watched interviews with the both of them, and on one hand, I have a lot of respect for Mustafa as a human being and just as a lover of this franchise that he had a hand in, and I would never speak ill of him as a person. In terms of his role in the franchise, I think he was maybe not directly responsible, but he had a direct role in what were, in my opinion, some of the worst decisions made throughout the history of this franchise, specifically with bringing Michael back over and over and over and over again, even when the franchise hit multiple points that it would have been so appropriate to finally just kill him off and be done with it or move on to something else. I told you about this before, that I was one of the blog writers for Horror Movie Talk, which is another podcast run by my friend Bryce Hansen, and David Day, his best friend, used to be the co-host of that show. Then he left. He still comes on every now and again, but Bryce is the main guy in charge of that now. But I wrote an article that I emailed to you about Halloween 3 Season of the Witch and John Carpenter's original intent for the franchise, where he didn't design Michael Myers to be a recurring character. The original, according to him at least, was meant to be a one and done story. Yeah, and he knew even before the plans for a sequel were announced, that there wasn't enough meat on this character for him to come back 12 films later. He didn't want to milk a franchise out of this guy. What? But he understood that the studios were going to go through with it with or without him. He just didn't have the power to control that. So he and his wife at the time, Deborah Hill, wrote the script for the original Halloween 2, 1981, which is one of my favorite hospital-based horror films. I talked about that in a past Horror Convos episode that discusses the horror of hospitals. You want to talk about a film that royally pissed me off, was what Rob Zombie did in his take on Halloween 2, just specifically what he did to the incorporation of the hospital. It takes a lot to get me genuinely pissed about any movie, but just what Rob Zombie did with his take on H2, you can go back and listen to that episode if you want to hear my thoughts on it. I don't want to. This whole episode will be me just raging about that if we get back into it. Long story short, I've always liked Michael Myers as a concept, as this modern incarnation of the boogeyman, and just the general idea of this unkillable, faceless evil, this shape, as Carpenter originally called him, or credited him, I think. That it seems to have no motivation. It's debatable whether it's human or supernatural, if it's just a force of nature. It's just pure and simply evil on two legs. And to me, that was when Michael Myers was at his best, was when he had no motive, or at least you didn't know what his motive was. It was left up to interpretation. And he's stalking Laurie just because he happened to target her no brother-sister relationship. But he's just doing what he's doing because that's simply what he is. And Dr. Loomis comes in. He's the perfect foil to that evil. Like the Van Helsing to his Dracula. Has his big hero moment saving Laurie. And you get that unforgettable ending of Michael being gone. And you don't know, is he dead? Is he going to come back? To me, that would have been the perfect place to end the story. And I'm personally of the opinion that that the franchise should have pushed forward at least for just one more film with Carpenter's anthology idea of wanting Halloween to become a series where every film was connected to Halloween in some way, but it would be new stories, new characters, maybe with them referencing each other. Like, his idea was basically American Horror Story before American Horror Story, and it sucks that fans really did not give Season of the Witch a fair shake, because that was the first film to really go into, I think you brought up the Celtic mythology, I believe, in like the Festival of Samhain and incorporating Stonehenge. It's like that film really had was the genesis for multiple strands of the sequels going forward, including the cult idea. Like the Cult of Thorn very logically could have started with that movie and just been incorporated into the Michael Myers universe if you had to bring Michael back. And that would have been a nice way to connect those two universes, one in which both involve that Celtic cult. It's just one universe has them without the Michael Myers character, like he's a fiction in that universe, and then bring it into one that directly connects to him. So I have a complicated relationship with the series overall. I fell out of love with it by the Rob Zombie films, or by Resurrection before that, because after H2O, I realized that it was not about the art anymore. This franchise was just never going to stop, and Michael had become like horror's equivalent to Bowser from Mario. I stopped caring about anything the characters went through with him, because I realized no matter how many times they kill him or how many times they wrap up the story, it's like, as long as it makes money, like Mustafa was just never going to give him up. The studios were never going to give him up. And I just got to a point where I'm like, it just feels like nothing matters in this series anymore. Like, it's been rebooted like 5 times now, and it just feels like it's never going to end. So that's my point of view. Feel free to like challenge my point of view on that.
Yeah, Keith. I guess I'm going to start by saying your argument. I've heard it all before. It's a very common point of view. Especially when it comes to not only the sequels, but when it comes to the Curse of Thorn backstory specifically. Like you just touched on it perfectly. Like I had to learn a long time ago, a couple of years ago, because I used to be on Facebook and YouTube comments. And I realized it's not worth debating. It's not worth debating some people, because you're never going to change their mind about anything. And like, whatever you like is whatever you like. So it's all subjective, right? So, I think you hit on it. Yeah, exactly right. Like, John Carpenter only intended it to be a one and done. And I think whether or not a lot of people want to admit it subconsciously or directly, they would have preferred it to have just been a one film with them, and then that was it. And I understand that. Like, it is, but then I can come out with it with like this. So Star Wars, for example, I think right now, you just described what Star Wars is right now. Like, they're milking it already too much at this point, with so many spin-offs, simultaneous spin-offs right now on Disney Plus. Like, it seems like that's where they're at right now with Star Wars, that franchise. I guess another point I was going to go with, Keith, is the biggest thing for me is, I totally understand, like I said, whether or not people want to admit it or not. I think a lot of people, fans, would have just preferred it to have just been one film. But the thing is, you could argue, though, like with Star Wars Episode 4, that also could have been a one and done. But like, as you point out with George Lucas, he didn't intend it that way. But the way it ended, right, with the Death Star exploding, you could interpret that the Rebel Alliance was victorious against the Galactic Empire. But there was a lot of unanswered questions, just like with the ending of John Carpenter's classic, him and Deborah Hill. Like, I mean, regardless, him and Deborah Hill co-created one of the most iconic horror characters of all time. I mean, there's no mistaking it. Like, for me, you can make that argument that Michael Myers is as iconic as the jack-o'-lantern when it comes to Halloween, the holiday in pop culture. He is that iconic alongside the jack-o'-lantern. And even, it's very fitting, right, in the opening title credits of Halloween, 1978 Halloween, the jack-o'-lantern, the close-up of the jack-o'-lantern. That was a brilliant shot. In terms of kind of being able to kind of refute, well, not refute, but have rebuttals. One of the biggest
You're totally fine. Feel free to refute. Feel free to rebut.
No, okay. Since this is your podcast, like I just want to do what I got to do. So as a guest, so
it's all right, man.
No,
Let's
I appreciate you giving me this platform, Keith. So one of the biggest things, I guess, first off, is John Carpenter has in the past, hinted that Michael Myers is a supernatural force, right? So, and I think that ties perfectly into the supernatural backstory via the Curse of Thorn, because I would argue a supernatural Michael Myers is way scarier, than just some normal guy that happened to escape from a mental hospital on Halloween night. Like, because if you go with that interpretation, I think that's already been done before, even in 1978. Like, okay, just a normal guy that escaped from a mental institution. I don't really think that's scary. I think a supernatural Michael Myers is scary. And so I think despite the fact that you and others have argued that, okay, the supernatural backstory demystifies him, I think there's still a degree of mystery. And I would argue that it's a case-by-case basis, because one of the biggest things I'm coming at this with is, look at Darth Vader, right? You could argue that the prequels demystified Darth Vader because you saw him as a kid as Anakin Skywalker, and then him becoming a Padawan, then becoming a Jedi, and then him becoming this unbalanced Jedi who later betrayed the Jedi Order and turned to the Sith. That prequel trilogy demystified the same menacing figure people first saw in A New Hope on the Tantive 4. That guy that came in like that, a helmet, this mysterious figure draped in black, coincidence, also draped in black. Like, we didn't really know much about him in A New Hope. But of course, as obviously by Return of the Jedi, by Empire Strikes Back, and then the prequels, you could argue that demystified him. But I would think some people would fight those who have that opinion on that, and just also, like, I don't know if you've probably seen, I don't know if with the Marvel, like Black Widow, the movie with Black Widow, right? That movie, you could argue that demystified her, because it's over there explaining stuff, giving her more backstory that I get. And then also, I guess what I'm trying to say is regardless of what genre it is, what I'm going to say here first and foremost tonight is, just because we don't know their motivation or backstory doesn't mean that there isn't one. There is one. We just don't know what it is. So it's still there, regardless if you want to acknowledge it or not. That is what I would argue.
Rather you add more detail to it, or just bring it down to a simple killer instinct, like whether it's rational or primal, incidental, psychological, supernatural. Well, I guess it's not that Michael shouldn't have a motivation at all. I guess it's the ambiguity of not knowing his motive, or not being able to humanize him or even. I like that Carpenter left it open to interpretation whether he was supernatural. Like, he didn't definitively say this is just a human guy. Like, he characterizes him as being larger than life all the way back in the original film. But I guess where some fans, particularly purists for the original, fall out of love with the franchise is when it not only demystifies Michael, but takes his motivation in directions that personally didn't resonate with them, or maybe the specific motive attributed to him through the Cult of Thorns storyline just wasn't the motive they would have wanted, or they felt like maybe it oversimplified the evil that he once represented, or made him appear more stereotypically evil just for the sake of being evil, as opposed to being the kind of evil that you can never really dissect or put a mold onto. Like, he's almost like an unrelatable darkness inside of a jumpsuit and a mask, merely with a human figure. So I guess there are fans who prefer that version, that they can project whatever motive they perceive onto him, whereas the more character and backstory you give to Michael and his surrounding lore, the more that lore becomes set in stone, and therefore the more of that ambiguity you're arguably taking away from from the appeal of his concept. There is definitely a subjectivity to it in terms of whether people prefer the ambiguity or they prefer the lore to be fleshed out over time, like Michael with no clear motive is too bland, too boring, or he doesn't have enough meat on him at that point to support multiple films. So you definitely see how the sequels tried to justify bringing him back without doing a retread of Halloween 1 and 2 all over again. I mean, even as far back as 2, they were trying to come up with new things to introduce just to justify spending another hour and 30 plus minutes watching this guy stalk people with various sharp objects. So if you had to try to do that, like the studios were going to do it with or without you, then expanding on his lore probably was the direction to go. It's not the direction I would have gone. It's not a direction that I wish Mustafa supported going or the studios would have gone. But, if it had to happen, then there are definitely worse ways it could have gone. Like, the series would have become far more repetitive, I will admit, if they had stuck to Michael having no clear motivation and he's just basically the same guy doing the same thing every movie, and all that really changes is the arsenal with which he mangles various people. Like, at that point, he basically becomes Jason. And Jason's sequels suffered from that exact problem of them not knowing going back and forth on what to do with his lore as the franchise went on too. Anyway, so you can definitely see how Halloween really gave birth to a lot of the tropes, and like David Day wrote an article about this for Horror Movie Talk, how the explosion of slashers that Halloween popularized. I mean, Black Christmas came before it, but Halloween was really the one that made it, people start paying more attention to it. And you could definitely argue, as David has, that the slasher craze of the 80s really wrote characters like Michael into a corner where it's like, there's money to be made off of this dude, but at the same time, you got to think about the artistic integrity and the creator's intent, because intent always matters. Even, like I always say, actions generally speak louder than words. Impact generally speaks louder than intent. So it is definitely a balancing act as the series goes on. What are you going to do? What are you going to change? What are you going to add? And how much of this is creatively motivated versus, blatantly financially motivated?
No, I think you bring a good up point, though. But what I was going to say is, one of the other things that I'm trying to push up against is the popularity fallacy. Just because a large number of people hold a popular idea, a belief, doesn't mean they're necessarily right. So just the majority of, like, I guess yourself and others in the Halloween fan base that believe that the backstory demystifies them. I go with the popularity fallacy. That doesn't mean your guys are necessarily right. And so I'm in the minority. Like, I think right now, at this moment in time, I am probably one of the few people on planet Earth that is an ardent defender of the unrated producer's cut timeline. That's how I have characterized it. That for me, Halloween 6, the unrated producer's cut, that timeline from the original 2, 4, 5, and the producer's cut version of 6 is, for me, it's the definitive canon. It's the definitive backstory. No matter how many times they reboot the series. I'm sorry, Universal, Trancas International, Malika Khan. For me, that is the official backstory. No matter how many times they reboot it. I'm sorry. That is, for me, I think the elements are still there. That, the fear elements, like the unknowing, because one of the things I think I would kind of challenge you on, push back you on, is like you talk about the idea of him being pure evil. Yeah, I think what the backstory does, it kind of gives it a little bit more nuance and complicates it, because I'm not trying to say it makes you sympathize with him, because okay, if he was bestowed with this curse as a child, and then he was possessed by a demon to kill his entire family on the night of Samhain or Halloween, to order to restore balance or maintain the idea of balance as the Druids believed in. It's just why, and they have, and in the real life, the Druids do have this connection to human sacrifices, ritual sacrifices. They also believed in a strong connection to nature. So I think it perfectly fits in. But also, if you're going to name your series Halloween, your movie Halloween, You're not going to have it be just some guy who happens to wear a mask, walks around with a knife, and not go all out to the origins, which is Samhain, the dark Celtic origins of the holiday. You're going to go all out, in my opinion. You're going to go all out. I mean, that's what there's no doubt, like Season of the Witch, it inspired the lore. Like Daniel Farron's, I've even managed to be fortunate. I gave him compliments on Messenger and Facebook that I loved what he attempted to do.
Oh, nice.
And he responded back. It was great. I actually hopefully maybe to get him to come on my podcast. I hope to get next year, but him and what Malika caught, yes, fingers crossed, Keith, yes. Him and I think what he did, like the first time when I met Caitlin, she taught me a lot because she knows a lot about her niche within horror, the monstrous feminine. And I absolutely love her passion for what she's passionate about. And that's like my passion for this. Like everybody is passionate about something, or a lot of people are. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I don't know if you've ever seen Breaking Bad, the TV series, that a lot of people...
Yeah, my mom and I binged it when it was on Netflix.
Okay. A lot of people praise it for its storytelling and its catharsis. That is how I feel about the producer's cut backstory for Michael Myers, because one of the biggest things, really quick to go into this, I don't know if you agree with me on this or not, but I think Donald Pleasance gave one of the best horror performances as Dr. Loomis in the original film by John Carpenter. And that was an Oscar-worthy performance, in my opinion. That is a hot take. That is a hot take of mine.
110%.
And also on the flip side, this is another hot take. I think the late Mitchell Ryan, who played Dr. Wynn in Halloween 6 in both versions, but the version I really love him in, of course, is the unrated producer cut. He gave, I think, the best performance of his career as Dr. Wynn. Like, he really fleshed out a character that was just meant to be a background character in the original film. That was just like a throwaway character, you could argue. He, to be revealed as the overarching antagonist of the franchise, it really recontextualized a lot for me. I mean, another thing is, since when I was growing up, I was an avid watcher of Cartoon Network, right? So the show Ed and Eddie. Eddie's older brother was revealed to be the overarching antagonist of the series. So that's kind of a similar role. But then you look at, I guess going back to Star Wars, right? So in Star Wars, like in the original trilogy, like in the beginning, New Hope, you just saw Darth Vader. He had like this ominous, larger-than-life presence. But in Return of the Jedi, it's revealed that Palpatine is the overarching antagonist of the series. Yeah. And
we saw a little bit of him in Empire, like before Ian McDiarmid came into the role. But I was going to bring that up. Like with Dr. Wynn, like you could characterize him as the Palpatine too. Michael's Vader, or that definitely works. In terms of if you had to introduce an overarching antagonist beyond Michael.
Yes, and I would also argue though the dynamic is vastly different, because based on what is shown in the producer's cut version, like I absolutely love this scene where Dr. Loomis confronts Wynn inside his office, and Wynn tells him, "The time has come for you to know the truth. The time has come for you to join us." Kind of going along with, Mitchell Ryan's performance as Dr. Wynn, that I think him and Donald Pleasance, for their respective roles, did a phenomenal job, especially on screen together. Like, I loved it because you got the sense that they were really colleagues. Like, that dynamic, I think, was great. But what I was going to say, Keith, is that with Dr. Loomis, in a version of the first draft of Halloween 6 by Daniel Farron's that didn't make the final cut of either film, the producers or the theatrical, was Dr. Loomis says this line that I absolutely love, and I think it's 100% true. He's like, "I knew what he was, but I never knew why." And that is a very powerful statement to make. That, because it's obviously true, because in the first movie, he knew Michael was evil. He was warning the citizens of Haddonfield, the Sheriff Brackett, right? That he's like, that famous quote inside the Myers house that a lot of fans love to quote. that Michael had the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. And with the supernatural backstory via the Curse of Thorn, it contextualizes and explains that the blackest eyes is the devil's eyes, the evil. But I also kind of would argue it has a little bit of more nuance to it. But like the fact is it's kind of like Captain Ahab and Moby Dick. That Loomis was like Ahab, Michael was like Moby Dick. Loomis, for so many years, was chasing Michael. He knew what he was, but he was always perplexed because he didn't know what the motivation was. And I think obviously he was obsessed with this patient because he was his ultimate failure. He saw Michael as his ultimate failure because he never could figure out what drove him to kill his sister, right? His sister Judith, in 1963. And you kind of touched on this earlier, right? John Carpenter, oh my gosh, he's the horror master. Like, he is one of my favorites. What's the beautiful about the first film with him and Deborah Hill, it is so open-ended that the backstory fits perfectly in so many ways. If I could write a book, I mean, I would love to about that. I mean, one of the biggest things is it leaves a lot to the imagination, just like you said. I mean, he shot Michael 6 times at the end of that film, right? And then when Michael just disappeared and the breathing, I love that ending. Yep. That was in my opinion, I mean, this may seem blasphemous. I think Halloween 5 had one of the best endings in the entire franchise because it left audiences in suspense because Michael was out of the jail cell, the police station was on fire, all the police officers were gunned down by this mysterious guy you didn't know about at that point, 1989, who this was. That I love how that cliffhanger ending, and then it left people in suspense, I would argue, for 6 years until 1995. And that's why I would argue it had, I mean, I'm not trying to, I mean, of course, the ending of the original is iconic, but I would think 5 is up there for me. That I think it was one of the best endings of the franchise because it left people wondering for 6 years, okay, what happened to Michael? Who was that mysterious man in black? What's going on here? And that left so much, like I talked about earlier, like Breaking Bad. A lot of people praise that storytelling. That's where I'm coming at it with this, with the Curse of Thorn backstory, that enthusiasm, right? Like people love, there's some people, like they're invested in Breaking Bad. They love the catharsis, the elements, Walter White, like Gus, the battle that he had with Gus and then Mike and then the ultimate ending. That's how I feel about this backstory because, I mean, not only that there was this mysterious guy in black, but later it was revealed to have been the guy that Dr. Loomis thought he knew for so many years at Smith's Grove. That was his colleague. Yeah, bitch! And then also, okay, I'm going to address this right here because I've addressed this before. So I think the backstory, it answers so many plot holes from the original film. One of the biggest ones that a lot of fans do not, I have not seen anybody talk about this. First of all, how did Michael escape? Like, how did all those patients get outside that dark and stormy night, right? That Loomis is coming to pick him up. Nobody really, I haven't seen fans really question that. A lot of fans go directly to, okay, who taught Michael how to drive? Who taught him how to drive? That plot hole of, okay, if he was incarcerated since he was 6 years old, who taught him how to drive a car? Well, I mean, the backstory lends itself to his guardian, Dr. Wynn. He had somebody on the inside. Dr. Wynn was watching over him, protecting him. He taught him how to drive, unbeknownst to the rest of the staff, or maybe a close, trusted few that were part of the Thorn cult. That's for me, that's left to open to my own imagination. But what is clear, though, is it makes perfect sense that Wynn orchestrated Michael's escape by intentionally letting the patients out that night to serve as a diversionary tactic for Dr. Loomis, to be distracted with, because Michael needed to take that station wagon and dip back to Haddonfield to complete his work, which was, since I'm going by what was established in Halloween 2, that him and Laurie were siblings, that he had to kill the remainder of his family. And then I have an explanation, reasoning for why Michael didn't. Okay, if we're going by that logic, okay, why didn't he kill his mom and dad right when he was coming outside, when his dad took off the clown mask, right? I would argue because that was his first kill, and he was a child. even though he was possessed by a demon, he had the powers of Thorn. It left him a little bit dazed. Like it was his first kill. You could explain that's why there was a hesitancy there. That's why he didn't kill his mom and dad then. And otherwise, there would have not have been a story, basically, in my opinion, for the Thorn stuff. That is my argument.
It would have required a little more suspension of disbelief as to how he could kill his parents.
Yeah. That I think that it lends itself perfectly that because it was first kill with Judith, it left him a little bit of a daze because he was only a child, but also because this demon that was possessing him. That just because you're possessing a body, I mean, a demon was just possessing a 6-year-old boy. You got to go with emotion sometime. I mean, that's my reasoning behind it. That it was his first kill, and he was a little bit in the daze, and maybe he was a little bit perplexed and confused about what was going on. But what I love from 6, right, the unrated producer's cut, is the character of Mrs. Blankenship. And okay, I'm just going to explain it for your audience, for those of maybe who have never seen the either version of 6. She was a character who lived across the street from the Myers house. That Tommy Doyle, he was one of the kids that Laurie was babysitting that night in the original film, and I love that they brought him back. That he ended up being almost like this kind of conspiracy theorist type of character, right? That he...
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say, for all the kids out there, here, Tommy is played in this film by a very young Paul Rudd. I forget if this was his first acting role or not. Definitely the first thing I saw him in growing up. Yeah, but a lot of Halloween fans, even to this day, when they see Paul Rudd, they think of Tommy before they think of Ant-Man, or most anything else he's done. And because he became a major player in the series, which to its credit, I think the sequels, even the latest trilogy, did a adequate job. In Tommy's case, a solid job of taking these minor characters that were so inconsequential to earlier entries, and very much whatever his name is, who became Jason's mortal enemy in part 7. He was at the end. He killed Jason, or helped kill him in the final chapter as a little boy. He was in the asylum or the institution in part 5. Then he came back in 6, and I think 7 as an adult. I always forget his name. Oh, there you go.
Jarvis.
To him, what more influence from Halloween there?
I want to say Paul Rudd, I think he did a fantastic job as an older Tommy Doyle. He knocked it out of the park. I loved it. Because, I mean, think about it like this. If you're he was 8 years old at the time, he was just a kid when Laurie was babysitting. That was a traumatic experience to go through, to see some guy in a mask wielding a butcher knife. He went through a terrifying ordeal Halloween night 1978, and then for the rest of his life, that followed him through. That's very powerful. That mimics real life trauma, PTSD, if you will.
Yeah.
And he used that trauma to go down this rabbit hole of figuring out what was. It's kind of left open to. Figuring out how he pieced it all together. Right? He pieced it together before Loomis did. That Michael was under the influence of a druid curse, and that gave him his supernatural abilities. That's why he could never die. It also explains, Keith. It also, one of the biggest things, it explains how the heck did he survive that hospital explosion at the end of 2. And how Loomis did too, because I could argue maybe, obviously, Thorn had plans for Loomis too. Divine intervention, so to speak. That it explains. You can, you can, but for sure with Michael, it explains how he survived that explosion, because the supernatural healing abilities he had via Thorn. He was in a coma for 10 years, and then he got when it was like the bat signal, right? But it's the Thorn constellation in the sky. That was Michael's bat signal that he knew, okay, this is his time. He's got to go back to Hanfield to finish the job.
I was just going to say real quick, as far as plot contrivances go, in terms of how you keep the character coming back, there are definitely worse directions they could have gone than a demonic influence continually resurrecting him. Jason's been resurrected by lightning. Freddy got brought back just by virtue of people remembering him, and somehow that as long as even one person remembers him, he can't permanently die. It's like you have a lot of horror icons who survive on these kind of arbitrary, at times a little contrived narrative elements. But if it works and it doesn't outright break the lore, then there's no reason you can't do it. Like that's not like betraying Carpenter's original by any means, because Carpenter didn't, like you said, didn't explain any of that stuff. So it does work on a narrative level, and to its credit, hot take, it's nowhere near as overused of a convenience as nanomachines have been for the Metal Gear series. It's like, do you know, you could write a book of how many things in Metal Gear Solid at this point relate in some way to nanomachines. It's clones, nanos. It's generally one of those two at the fork in the road somehow.
Nanomachine, son.
Oh, I meant to bring this up earlier. You were talking about Dr. Wen's conversation with Dr. Loomis. I didn't remember I haven't read any of the early scripts or unused scripts for like the Lost Halloween sequels. There's like so many ideas for Halloween sequels that never got made. Like there's a book, if you haven't heard of it, I highly recommend you check it out. Taking Shape 2 by Dustin McNeil and Travis Mullen, I think is his name. And that one is like a compilation of so many scripts that never made it into production.
Well, I was going to say really quick, it's interesting you mentioned Dustin McNeil, because I emailed him once, and he agrees with me about Dr. Wen and that backstory. He got back to me, and he was like, I'm very much in agreement with me, pretty much. And I was like, wow, that means a lot to me. So from the guy who compiled all of these different lost ideas for Halloween. Like one of the, I think, I don't know if very many people know this. At one point, they entertained Michael going into space just like Jason.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by
Michael Myers.
Space!
And I'm glad they didn't do it.
Oh my God.
I'm not even joking. But there was also, I don't know if you knew this or not, or any of your listeners on your podcast.
I believe it, but believe me.
No, but there's another one. I'm just gonna, they also entertained a crossover with Hellraiser, because when both franchises were under Dimension Films, they thought about somehow tying Michael's evil to the Lament configuration and Pinhead. And I'm like, I mean, for me, thinking about that idea, I'm like, yeah, I think for people who have issues with the Curse of Thorn backstory, I mean, how would they have responded to the fact that, okay, they're going to try to explain his evil with the puzzle box from Hellraiser and somehow tie the Cenobites to him? That would have, I mean, that would have been interesting to have seen, but I don't think that would have been executed very well. I mean, I don't know if anybody, you probably knew this or not, like one of the alternate endings for Freddy versus Jason was to have Pinhead show up to break up their fight when they went to hell and say something to the effect of, gentlemen, what seems to be the problem? That would have been epic if they would have got Doug Bradley. I mean, I think Doug Bradley was on board, but I think because of copyright issues or studio issues, they couldn't do that.
Yeah, the whole backstory to like Freddy versus Jason is in some ways like an even wilder ride than the Lost Halloween sequels, including like the different versions Part 6 went through. It's just Freddy versus Jason is, I mean, it's really just the modern generation's equivalent to when the Hammer horror Universal monsters started fighting each other. But I mean, I remember growing up, there were rumors for years of like Freddy versus Jason, Jason versus Michael, Freddy versus Jason versus Ash. Like at one point it was going to cross over into Evil Dead, and this really is a side effect of arguably of the slasher craze that exploded in the 80s. It's like everybody wanted to get a piece of it. They talked multiple times like people look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe as if it's this amazing milestone, and in some respects it is. But they're acting like it's nothing like that's been tried before. We came so close to getting a cinematic universe like probably a dozen times between the 80s through the 2000s when it came to iconic slasher icons. And see, I mean, these characters almost entered each other's worlds more times than I know of off the top of my head. And you study the production history of these different franchises and how often they overlapped with one another. or even though it never made it to the cutting room floor, like to the screen, it's really amazing what an unintentional family tree they became in terms of, what property is affecting which, who's got the rights to this or that, who's disagreeing over what to do with this or that. It was really just like, in some ways, it was like keeping up with the Kardashians level of drama, of just behind the scenes drama for horror icons. I swear, you could make a whole series out of that, just a history of like behind the scenes drama for iconic movie franchises. Because in some ways, it's like it really is more amazing and entertaining stories than the works of fiction that we got. One thing you mentioned that I wanted to bring up was I didn't know about Dr. Loomis saying, I always knew what he was, but I never knew why. The line I remember from that scene that made it into the finished version of the film that I saw, I don't remember which version I saw. It's the one where he points the gun at Dr. Wynn and Loomis is like, I thought Michael was a monster, but you? And he doesn't get the chance to kill him. I don't
theatrical.
think. Yeah, okay. So I saw the theatrical version then. But that is one line that stuck with me in terms of like, how do you introduce a character more evil than Michael, or how do you get more evil than Michael with all the shit we've seen him do? It's like, you have to go the extra mile to top Michael not only killing his own niece after she's freshly given birth, after it's strongly implied, at least in one version of the script, there was like a deleted scene of him approaching her with her tied down, like he and impregnates her. So it's an incest baby, and then one of those nurses is like, save your baby, and Tommy gets the baby. Jamie stays behind for whatever reason, tries to call Loomis, she can't. And she ends up in a barn or something where Michael pushes her onto that farm equipment, like impales her. And I have such a thing about impalement. Like, I hate seeing characters get mortally wounded and not die right away, and then they continue suffering. Because I'm a very empathetic personality. It's just like how my brain's always been wired. So I can't help putting myself in that character's shoes and just, oh my God, I cannot imagine the agony she must have been in. It's like her spine's probably destroyed. I definitely hope she couldn't feel much. There's like this glimmer of hope, like maybe he injured her in just the right spot where she can't feel anything anymore. But then, of course, she tells him, you can't have him, Michael. And he has to do this one last middle finger of cruelty by turning the machine on, and the blades start like sawing through her, and she like dies screaming.
Overkill.
My God, it's like at that point in the franchise, or maybe even after that point, that's probably the cruelest I've ever seen Michael. Like, not just towards a victim, but towards his own flesh and blood. And that whole opening really just strongly establishes for longtime fans, like, Michael is not fucking around. And he shows no mercy toward anyone. And he is the devil incarnate. He will torture you to death inch by bloody inch if he wants to, or worse if you piss him off. So it's just that for me as a kid, like the first time I saw that, and then later when he kills the husband of that family living in the Strode house by like electrocuting him to the point that his head explodes, I'm just like, holy shit.
You might want to put on a helmet so it don't make a mess when I blow your mind.
God, I remember when being stabbed and pinned to a wall was the worst thing that could happen to you. Like, now Michael's straight up on the warpath.
Rampage.
No, I know what you're talking about. Some of what you're referencing was deleted scenes. Specifically, you could find them on the Scream Factory versions of Halloween 6 that contains both the theatrical and producer's cut versions of the film. Also, one of the biggest things is, I do know I champion the Curse of Thorn backstory, but one of the things I didn't like about the unrated producer's cut was the incest subplot. Like, that was completely unnecessary, and the Weinsteins, I guess now they're reaping what they're sowing, right? Harvey Weinstein specifically. But on a separate note, that they that was completely unnecessary, and I just ignore it. I just ignore that subplot because for me, okay, so I guess I would go with my ranking with the producer's cut. For me, I rated 8.5 out of 10. If they would have taken out that subplot, that unnecessary, and incorporated a lot of flashbacks to the original movie, like showing Dr. Wynn helping Michael escape, teaching him how to drive, or following him that like in the events of the original movie in his black duster and fedora, I would have loved that. I would have loved those. Even, I mean, I'm going to go and say this: like, I would have loved if they would have shown Dr. Wynn getting inside Michael's head, telling him, "Kill for him, Michael. Kill for him." Like the night that Michael murdered his sister. That would have tied it so well together in a flashback. That would have been amazing for me. I would have loved that. Since I got to go off for what we're going off for, right? Since I like to think Wynn was there off screen. And another thing is in the beginning of the original Halloween, right? Michael is hiding behind this tree. I like to think he was across the street in Mrs. Blankenship's house. There's nothing that says he wasn't, because he was already across the street before he went to kill his sister. And I like to think he was already probably maybe over at Mrs. Blankenship's house, because she was also part of the Cult of Thorn. And maybe Dr. Wynn was also there too, but there's a lot left. I guess I like to pay attention to a lot of details, so that's how I make my arguments is I think about a lot of things, maybe catch things that a lot of people, maybe occasional viewers, don't upon initial viewings or at all. So I love details, and so what I was going to say is, you talk about Star Wars, right? So I don't know if you watched the entire Clone Wars series, all 7 seasons. Like
I have.
Darth Maul. Okay, because then you know what I'm talking about here. So Darth Maul, he was a minor character in the Phantom Menace. He comes back in the Clone Wars series. He kicks ass and he takes names. Like, that was amazing what he did in the Clone Wars series. And then plus it's revealed that he knew Anakin was going to fall to the dark side. Like, that shows another, he did a Dr. Wynn right there. He went from this unimportant minor background character, later returned and proved to be important to the story in his own way.
Yeah, Maul is definitely an example of how it can work to bring a minor character back in a big way and give them more of a major role. So in that respect, yes, Dr. Wynn and Tommy Doyle and others could very much serve that purpose for Halloween. It certainly beats how often the sequels just brought in whole new characters that we had to get invested in over and over when most of them were going to be fodder for Michael regardless.
Killionaire.
Yeah, and kind of going along with that is another thing I'm going to mention, because I know I talked about Hellraiser too, like not the sequel, but the franchise, right? Clive Barker's Hellraiser. I followed it a little bit, but I'm not as there's the Clive Barker podcast on YouTube. I listen to them. They're very well versed in Hellraiser. But one of the biggest things they point out and also realized about Pinhead, right? He went from this character who followed a moral code, his own code, that he only took you, the Cenobites only took you, right, if you opened up the box. And you had to have the desire. And it later, so it's kind of a different trajectory, because Michael went from a slasher to more nuanced with the backstory I'm championing. Pinhead, he went from the guy with the moral code. Later, he became just a run-of-the-mill slasher. He killed, by Hellraiser Bloodline, he killed people regardless if you opened the box or not. He took you. So where was the moral grays there? I don't know if you ever heard of the show Earth Final Conflict. It was based on a Gene Roddenberry script that his widow sold for syndication. Season 1 was a fantastic.
What is the name of it? One more time.
Earth Final Conflict. It was a Gene Roddenberry.
Okay. Yeah, you cut off for a second there.
Sorry about that.
I haven't heard of that. It sounds. It might ring a bell. I don't believe I ever watched that.
And the reason why I bring it up is basically just to give a quick recap. It is set in a distant future where these group of aliens known as the Talons arrive to Earth, and within 3 years of their arrival, they cure cancer and all these other horrible diseases, and pretty much all the world governments are on board with them. They accept them as part of pretty much they have representatives on Earth. But there's like this underground resistance movement that believes that Talons have ulterior motives, and they did. But the thing is, after season 1, they ruined it. And later but that potential was ruined. But my point is basically, just like with Pinhead, okay, you went from the Cenobites, they had this lawful evil, like, just like I would argue with Dr. Wynn is like not full on evil, right? Because I think I'm kind of arguing, okay, like, he's got a little bit of Thanos mindset with doing the sacrificing of an entire family, the druid cult of Thorn, by sacrificing a whole family. You appease Thorn to stave off these terrible calamities for civilization like famine, war, disease, and just like, I mean, even look in real life, right? The Maya, the Aztecs, all the throughout world history, there have been civilizations that have practiced human sacrifices because they believed in ideas, or not even all balance, but believed in doing it to get something out of it.
Yeah.
So
and of course, like, people today might actually try to defend that, like at least some radical, tolerate everybody minded people. They might go into that's cultural. It's their religious faith. Like they go into all those justifications. I'm a very tolerant person, and I'm not prejudiced against most anyone. And at a certain point, if we can't agree that sacrificing live human beings, especially children, is objectively something we should not tolerate, that no modern society should tolerate, then, I mean, there's pretty much no conversation to be had at that point. If we can't even find common ground on that because we're that afraid of coming off, closed-minded or offending people, or we're afraid of religious persecution arguments. It's like, I'll tell you one thing. Plenty of laws exist to prevent you from persecuting someone or discriminating against someone based on their religion. And I would love to see the laws that prevent religions from discriminating against or outright persecuting you. It's like you won't find nearly as much encouragement when it comes to, discouraging people of various faiths from persecuting you, because they can always go into that argument of course there's legal boundaries. Like, I'm not saying there's literally no laws to give you some security from that. But there's definitely a somewhat of a double standard between, well, I can't, make you feel bad based on what you believe. Either you can sure as hell make me feel bad based on what you believe, either simply because I don't share your belief. So there's definitely an interesting dichotomy there. If that's the right word to use, who's on how tolerant we can be of one thing versus how we won't hear any debate about another. That was a bit of a tangent, but it's just as soon as you brought that up, it's just like, and you could arguably tie that back into Season of the Witch a little bit with, I don't know exactly what their cult beliefs were in terms of if they were trying to prevent a coming apocalypse or something, but that definitely, again, could have laid the DNA for that when they started the Cult of Thorn trilogy.
Yeah. So the antagonist in Season of the Witch in 3, Cochrane, right? Who's the CEO of Silver Shamrock, the company that makes the Halloween masks.
God, in that don't film, even say its name. That jingle in my head.
No. Hey, I don't know. Like, I'm willing to entertain. Okay, Keith, I'm willing to entertain this idea as an Easter egg. The mask Michael wore was made by Silver Shamrock. That is like an Easter egg. I'm willing. I don't know. Like, that might be taking it too far, but I would be willing to accept that, like, as a reference, but not anything more than that. But other on the flip side, though, Cochrane, I think he believed in wholesale sacrifices, like kind of a Thanos-wide deal versus the Druid Cult of Thorn, where a family was sufficient enough. So you can see there's a schism there, and that's kind of a crossover. Like, I have some friends of mine that I that I've debated with about this, that talked about that. If Cochrane and Wynn met, they would be adversaries, because Wynn has this specific idea of sacrifices and the cult, his cult, that he leads. And Cochran's believing in a whole Thanos-wide level of a whole entire world sacrifices, and Wynn's probably gonna be like, "Chill, bro. No, no, we're not going there." No, and I'm curious if maybe for another time. There's some people who think that Thanos is right.
They go into the whole like Malthusian arguments. I think is the name of the person they refer to with like the question of like finite resources and the population problem and such. We had that exact same ethical debate when I was in college, like in biology class, and then I think we talked about it in ethics once or twice. Like in regards to the two different cults goals between Cochrane versus Dr. Wynn, it's definitely kind of a trolley problem scenario. And in some aspects, it's like, would you sacrifice one family or would you sacrifice all of humanity? It's like they're even doing that with the Spider-Verse movies. And in some ways with, what's his name? Miguel O'Hara's Spider-Man 2099, that whole dilemma with Miles' dad of like, you can save one life or you can save an entire dimension. And it's like, as much as I love the Spider-Verse movies, I think they're the best thing that's been done with the Spider-Man franchise since the Raimi trilogy. I personally just have a hard time suspending my disbelief that so many versions of Spider-Man would go along with that plan or even try to justify it, knowing how that affects their own universes, or if their own universe got put on the chopping block, how many lives would they sacrifice to preserve the canon? I do love the meta narrative there of like characters essentially being at the mercy of their own multiverse's canon. And I hope that Beyond the Spider-Verse follows Miles actively trying to defy that, like figure out who's in charge of all this and try to appeal to them to maybe like reboot the universes so that no more dimensions have to die.
Yeah. And then another thing you got me thinking about, Keith, is like, yeah, I think there's no question, because when you got mass market appeal, like Dimension films, like this is notorious for those, like, I guess me who know the history behind the production of Halloween 6, the troubled production. Because Daniel Farron's, like, his vision that him and Malika Akkad, Mustafa Akkad's son, right, they were trying to push for was ultimately going to be the producer's cut version of the film. But Dimension Films didn't want it because they did a test screening of the producer's cut version of Halloween 6. And to my understanding, it was just a bunch of young people, young kids, teenagers, young adults. They weren't very receptive to it, just like a lot of the Halloween fans today aren't. So that's why the Weinstein said, you got to go back to the drawing board. We want more blood. We want more gore, because we're the ones that are financing this venture here. And then kind of going on with that Mustafa Akkad, I think one of the biggest things is, he helped finance John Carpenter's original film, Halloween. That's why he stayed on. And one of the biggest things is, I think Mustafa Akkad had Michael Myers contractually obligated to not die. Okay, so I know a lot of people love H2O. Like, one of the biggest things for me is the mask. I didn't really like that mask. Like, one of the biggest things, like, that idea, of how somehow tying it back to at least having somehow Jamie Lloyd return and revealing that Laurie didn't die in that car accident that supposedly happened, that you find out in Halloween 4, right? If they could have done it that way, I would have loved to have seen how that would have worked. But one of the biggest things is, because of the messy ending of the theatrical version of 6, I understand why they rebooted it, because obviously they wanted to cash in. Okay, Jamie Lee Curtis, 20 years later. There was also actually a bidding war. John Carpenter was almost set to direct H2O. It almost happened, but it didn't. But that would have been another crazy thing if he would have came back.
God, if we could have seen what he would have done with the story and it, like, he would have fought for the ending that Jamie wanted. It like, this is where my relationship with Akkad, or my perception of him, like, again, seems like a totally nice guy, rest in peace, no ill will against him as a person. In terms of the decisions that he directly had a hand in for the handling of this franchise, it's like, again, if you had to pick an endpoint for the series, like at most, they should have stopped with H2O. And Jamie came, as far as I remember, because I researched the history of that movie at least a couple times. There's like several retrospectives on the Halloween franchise you can find online. As far as I remember from the interviews and what they showed in the script and the general behind the scenes featurettes, Jamie Lee Curtis came on to do that film with the understanding that it was 20 years after the original, and it was going to be the finale. She did not sign on for another trilogy. She didn't sign on for even a double feature, like, what ended up with how they just utterly disrespected her, the way they sent her off in Resurrection. And I was so angry with how they handled her at the beginning of Resurrection. Like, you want to talk about why Resurrection is my least favorite Halloween film, even more so than anything with the Cult of Thorn or Season of the Witch. That is exactly why. H2O was supposed to have the hunter or the hunted become the hunter. Laurie Strode finally faces her trauma. Like, everything the 2018 trilogy did was literally just a rehash of what H2O tried to do back in 2002, and it handled it so much better. You didn't need all this convoluted crap of like another doctor trying to control Michael or letting him out again, and you didn't need Laurie to still be living in Haddonfield for whatever fucking reason. Like, why would she stay in the place where her life as she knew it became a nightmare? Like, she would never still be living in Haddonfield, even if she was waiting for Michael to escape so she could kill him. Just move to the next city or the next town over. You don't stay in the frickin' neighborhood where it's like you actively have PTSD. Every street you walk on has a horrid memory associated with you, which is affecting her relationship with her daughter, and through that, her granddaughter. That's fucking stupid. Like no realistic person that I'm aware of would choose to stay in a place where something like that happened to them. And all you have to do is move just like even just a few blocks over or into the next county. And if Michael breaks out, go on the hunt for him then. Get a whole posse together like in Halloween Kills for all I care. The only reason they returned to Haddonfield, in my opinion, was for fan service, because they knew that if we're going to do yet another Halloween film, then yet again we're going to try to go back to the roots. But I'm getting on a tangent. Basically, for those of you who aren't aware listening, Jamie Lee Curtis did H2O with the understanding that she was going to get to kill Michael. She didn't know about the contractual detail that Michael couldn't die until very late into that production. Like, I think she found out at like the 11th hour. And she, as far as I remember, she walked into the office, I think, to talk to one of the studio executives, or I don't know if she talked to Mustafa himself or what their relationship was at that point. But she walks in, having read the contract, and she's basically like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what is the point of doing all of this? What did I come back for if you're literally just going to take us back to square one again? Like, I cut his freaking head off. How do you come back from that? And they came up with that bullshit excuse, that unbelievable Airplane 2, turn on the signs above the seats, unbelievable bullshit that Michael like did an old Scooby-Doo switcheroo with putting he crushed a random paramedic's throat and then put the mask and jumpsuit on him so Jamie killed an innocent man. It's like
unfriggin' believable.
I think we're on the exact same page with that, because that retcon, no, like the way H2O ended, it's exact. No, because even before that retcon, before the climax of the movie where she cuts his head off, right? His mannerisms don't indicate that he was just some guy that had his larynx crushed, that it was just some paramedic, right? That the mannerisms hinted that was Michael Myers. How do you retcon it to say, okay, that wasn't him, that was some other guy? No, the mannerisms were him. And then they tried to explain it away by saying, oh, no, it wasn't him. Like, I agree with you there 100%. Now, one of the biggest things is, like, I know H2O, like, okay, I'm going to say this. Resurrection, I think it's worse than Halloween Ends. The mask was atrocious, and one of the biggest issues I had with Ends, and a little bit with H2O, but I understand because it's kind of like, okay, they're kind of going off of like the era of the late 90s, with Scream and all that, right? Like they had to add like these kind of tongue-in-cheek jokes, make it a little bit humorous. That's why they had LL Cool J and stuff like that. I understand that. But one of the biggest things is I didn't like that CGI scene in H2O. You probably know the mask, right? You probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the mask was horrible. Well, it's like it looked nothing like the William Shatner mask. The CGI was very obvious.
And also saying the devil's eyes, and then you can see his whole eyeballs. Some stills, like memes. So much for the devil. No, okay. And Resurrection, that mask was awful. It looked like he was wearing mascara on that mask. Resurrection's mask, I'm like, how the heck? Oh my gosh. That's worse than even Halloween 5's mask. I'm sorry.
It's like, where do you keep getting these masks from that look so drastically different? It's like, how many different manufacturers are making this same mask that you can't keep William Shatner's likeness just relatively on point? Even if you have to remake the mask from scratch again, it's like, you could just get a mold of Shatner's face. It's like, could they not get him to sell his likeness again beyond a certain number of films? It's just, I never understood how they screwed up the mask so many times.
Yes. Yeah, for continuity reasons. That's why I have to imagine in 4, 5, 6 was kind of okay, but if they would have kept the mask, 2, I don't know if you knew this or not, 2 apparently is still the original mask that was worn by Nick Castle, the actor, who didn't, I know Tony Moran's the one that when he was unmasked and when he was fighting Laurie in that scene towards the end of the movie. But I know Dick Warlock, the reason why the mask looks a little bit different, I guess, because his face was a little bit rounder, bigger. That's why the eye slits look a little bit wider. But that was the original mask. And in my understanding is Nick Castle kept the original mask, but he didn't really it wasn't really taken care of that well. I think it was like above a fireplace for so many years. But the thing is, though, in the original John Carpenter, how many stunt double masks did they have that they could have preserved? There had to have been more than just one mask. And there were pictures, principal photography, behind-the-scenes photos of multiple masks from the original film. And so that's another thing I agree on.
It's like, if you could preserve a pair of the original Arabian-style ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz, you could find a way to preserve at least one version of this mask, even if you didn't know there was going to be a sequel yet. It's like, it's just literal decades this franchise has gone on now, and you somehow consistently fail to keep a continuity-ready mold of the mask. Yes, especially with the newest trilogy, I'll give them this at the very least. The mask stayed consistent. And to even Rob Zombie, I'll give him credit. The masks, there wasn't much of a mask left by H2, with Hobo Michael. But at the very least, they didn't look like blatantly different masks as soon as you see them. Even Halloween 4, I'll give credit. You can get away with Michael taking a different looking mask once, maybe twice. The battle damage excuse really lends itself well, especially with consecutive films that directly pick up where the last one left off. It's understandable he wouldn't have just a closet full of the exact outfit that it's guess I got to get another one. Casey Jones with the endless supply of bats and hockey sticks that he has from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's come on, that's the second, and his hockey mask, that's the second mask this week. But so you can get away with that once, maybe twice, but by Resurrection, I was just you guys just aren't even trying anymore. And it's funny you mentioned LL Cool J, from Deep Blue Sea, which is one of my favorite horror movies of the 90s. It's my favorite shark movie after Jaws. Jaws will always be number one for me. Deep Blue Sea is number 2. It's basically Jaws meets Jurassic Park, and it's two things that I love smashed together into something that still manages to feel like its own thing to enough of a point. And I love the practical shark effects in that movie so much. Like, I'm so glad they didn't just use CGI for all of it. It very much does feel like the same level of love that was put into the production of Jurassic Park, even if the effects haven't all aged perfectly. But there did seem to be that period where after Scream became a thing, I think like H2O in some ways very much felt like Halloween if it was in the Scream universe, because they had kind of that similar stylistic, almost horror comedic tone to it, especially with Laurie Strode's dynamic with her son. And so by the time they brought Busta Rhymes into Resurrection, it's like I'm thinking to myself, you're literally just struggling for star power at this point. Like, you can't fill the void that Donald Pleasance left. This is just like who's who of celebrities joining the Halloween universe now.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And another thing you got me thinking about, Keith, is that Samuel L. Jackson can't. Oh, I was going to think Samuel L. Jackson can't catch a break, can he? Like, first he gets eaten by velociraptors in Jurassic Park, then the shark in Deep Blue Sea. Man, no wonder he became Nick Fury in Marvel. He was tired of getting just eaten by these monsters and dinosaurs. It makes sense. That no. What I was going to say is no. And another thing is Scream and Halloween, by that point when H2O came out, right? They were both under Dimension Films Miramax, so it makes sense, I guess, why it'd be kind of a similar tone. But my understanding is, oh my gosh, I wonder how Wes Craven, rest in peace, Mr. Craven, but I don't think he liked Scary Movie very much. The parody film that launched because you know what was crazy? You know what was crazy about Scary Movie? They were under Dimension Films, and theoretically, they could have just used the mask from Scream for that entire movie. And I don't know why they didn't, because they were both under Dimension. I don't know if it was because of Wes Craven. There was just like a short cameo that the Ghostface mask had in the scene where Cindy's like in school, and then she looks out. It's supposed to be like a parody of when Laurie sees Michael outside the high school. Remember, I don't know, in the original film when she's in class. So, but but I was going to say, like, that's another thing, like Scary Movie, like the original. One of the crazy things is that ending, the twist when, Doofy is revealed to be the killer. And one of the things is that's kind of shocking that that was a very ingenious plot twist for a parody movie. But on the side note, but like
poor David Arquette, man. David Arquette.
No, I can't take Scream seriously. No. Are you the same one? Like, I can't take Scream seriously because of Scary Movie. I can't take it seriously.
I'll try to wrap it up here. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but real quick, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the last stage, or I should say the last two stages of the Halloween franchise in terms of the Rob Zombie era and then the most recent trilogy? Would you say that they were fine for what they were, or that they did more damage to the franchise, at least in terms of the fandom, than the Cult of Thorn trilogy did in terms of how controversial it was at the time?
I think Rob Zombie's, I think John Carpenter, even has said it before that in interviews, that he told Rob Zombie not to do a direct shot-for-shot remake of the original, to just do his own thing. Yeah. So for its own thing, as its own interpretation, it's fine, but without Donald Pleasance, he made the series. That's why I love the producer's cut timeline even more. He was in all those films. He came back to. Even when the masks lacked continuity and the house in Halloween 5, he kept continuity by appearing in those films as Dr. Loomis, reprising the role. He kept it. So I didn't touch on this with David Gordon Green's trilogy. What I loved about it was that they made Michael Myers serious again. Like, the mask was on point. James Jude Courtney, he did a cameo for me. I loved it. And so did Nick Castle. That James Jude Courtney, he knocked it out of the park. That I honestly felt that this was the same Michael Myers from the original film. That's how great of a job I think he did. Yeah. The storyline is a different story because because like after Resurrection, oh my gosh, they made him into a joke. I loved how David brought him back to being a menace, being serious. Like that firefighter scene in Kills was off the chain ruthless, like almost like Halloween 6 theatrical Michael Myers version, right? But one of the things with the last film Ends, I still think the producer's cut of Age 6 is more controversial, but I'm going to go with saying Ends. Why I think it is. They had this guy Corey. He kind of was like obviously a ripoff of the guy from Christine. I got those vibes from him. You know what I mean? And I think that was supposed to be like the intention, like the parallels there. But one of the other things with him is that not only that bothered me was that, okay, he basically took the mask and tried to become Michael Myers. But one of the things I was confused by is some parts of the movie felt like Donnie Darko, because I don't know if he was really seeing Michael or was just imagining him, if that makes sense. In some of the kill scenes, or like in the sewer sequences, it felt like, okay, is he really seeing him, or is this just like Donnie Darko? It's like in his head. I got kind of those vibes, and also what kind of they messed up with at the end of Kills. Laurie said every time Michael kills, he ascends. That's kind of flirting with the Curse of Thornback supernatural stuff. And they didn't do anything with it in Ends, because that's why now you want to talk about confusion. I don't know what David Gordon Green was trying to do, because, okay, was he trying to say Michael Myers was supernatural or not? Because he kind of flirted with it in Kills, and then it went nowhere, literally nowhere in Ends. Ends, they did one of the smartest things in a horror film ever. They basically chopped up Michael's body so he could never come back.
Yeah, watch them release the trailer for the next movie. Like, I think they're already in the process of it. It's something called Halloween Aftermath or whatever. It's like, at this point, I've pretty much given up all hope that as long as this franchise makes money, they're ever going to let Michael rest permanently. It's like, life finds a way in Jurassic Park. Life will find a way for Michael. That's why for me, this is what I'm saying, man. It's just they're never gonna like Mustafa Akkad is passed away, and they still won't let it end. It's just they can't resist. Because they're trying to do the Star Wars formula now with Michael Myers, and now I hate to say it, with Chucky, with the TV series. I don't know how much seasons Don Mancini has left, but I don't know if he's planning to just wrap up Chucky, because I haven't seen the series. I've heard that it's good. It is very good. Like, it beats that piece of crap 2019 remake by a mile. It is what I consider, what most fans consider, the true continuation of the Child's Play franchise. And it has all the production value of a movie, basically stretched into a series.
Well, I was going to say really quick, what I wish Don Mancini would hit on more is the Haitian voodoo mythology, because John was okay, Michael did mess up. Michael, in Halloween 6, the theatrical cut, he killed his mentor, Dr. Well, how dare you, Michael? But in Child's Play, Chucky kills John, who taught him how to do the voodoo magic, right? And this is another side thing. There's people that... have you seen Serpent in the Rainbow?
I keep wanting to watch that. I hear it's really good.
There's a fan theory, I think I'm open to subscribe to it, that it's set in the same universe as Child's Play. Basically, John was from that war-torn Haiti. He fled to the United States and taught Charles Lee Ray how to cheat death. But one of the biggest things is I wish Don Mancini would do, I don't know if he's going to plan this for the TV series, I wish he would bring in Baron Samedi, the guardian of the graveyard from the Haitian voodoo. Like, he needs to, or some, like, Haitian, maybe somebody that knew John from Haiti, they need to bring some, like, voodoo practitioners to come face-to-face with Chucky, like, saying, you bastardized the magic here, and we're here to put a stop to it. I wish he would do that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I wish he would do that.
Yeah, no spoilers, but it's funny you say that, because what you're talking about, they do kind of go in that direction with it. There's 3 seasons. Like, if you can find a way to watch it, like if you like the Child's Play series and you want more lore, Or it's like I encourage you to give it a chance. Just pretend the 2019 film never happened. That's what I do. My biggest gripe with the newest trilogy, it's like I've said it before. 2018, the trilogy as a whole was basically H2O done all over again, except now Laurie is so much older. She's the same age as Loomis was in the first film that it's so much more difficult to take her seriously as like, the traps she sets up are nice, but the whole premise of like Grandma Laurie going after Michael and taking the fight to him, like it was I could invest in it more when she was younger, and she had more actual fight scenes with Michael, and she was young enough that you could buy her not being able to out-muscle him. But at least she's not like, old and gray. To me, it's like Sarah Connor in Terminator Dark Fate. It's like, no disrespect to Linda Hamilton, I just can't take Grandma Sarah fighting ever more powerful Terminators seriously. It's like Arnold coming back as the T-800 again and again, and they use the whole excuse of, his human skin just aged over time. It's like, by Genesis, I was like, this is just getting sad. Like, can you please just stop? I mean, it was a great story. You found a perfect place to end it with 2. Just why can't we show respect to these franchises we loved by just learning when to leave good things alone? And it's like with the David Gordon Green trilogy, it's like 2018 is a rehash of H2O. Kills is a rehash of Halloween 4, especially with the mob going after him. And admittedly, that scene in Kills where that mob is beating the crap out of him, and then he starts to gradually recover and overpower them one after another. That was cool. But it makes no frickin' sense how not one person had a gun, like a shotgun, and they just splatter his head into the pavement. Like, you're hitting him with blunt force weapons. You characterize this guy as the boogeyman or the devil. Like, he in your eyes, at least, he's more than human. He's not just some guy. Not one of you brought a shotgun or a machine gun or even just like a Smith & Wesson or something, like a Dirty Harry's 500 Magnum. Somebody just bring a gun and dome this guy already. That's one thing. Yes, Jamie Lee Curtis did that in Halloween 2. She shot him in the face twice. But that was a pea shooter. Like that, I'm talking like shotgun blast, point blank to the skull. Well, yeah, let's see the Cult of Thorn get him back up from that shit, especially if this new trilogy was like supposed to be moving away from that. To get back up after that. And then Halloween Ends. I love it's like, with Halloween Ends, I was so afraid they were going to go the Jason Goes to Hell route of like his spirit inhabiting different bodies, like jumping from person to person. I liked that idea. Yeah. I liked that idea when they implied his evil was inhabiting Jamie at the end of Halloween 4. Or like, you could have ended the franchise right there, and I would have been satisfied if you didn't want to do H2O. I liked the idea when they did it that way, but by the time it got to the new trilogy, I'm just like, in my opinion, the only reason anybody likes the new Halloween films, for the most part, is because they're literally just redoing ideas that were done before in previous films. Like the new Doctor who lets him out to go back to Haddonfield. That's just Dr. Wynn all over again, except not as good.
Yeah, not as cool. I'm sorry, Sarton? No, he's no Dr. Wynn, man. No, not even close. No, what I was going to say is, one of the other things I have issues with Halloween Ends, for being labeled the final confrontation with Laurie, it was so underwhelming, because that should have been the whole plot of the movie. It was only 10-15 minutes by the time the movie was over. That was it. That was an underwhelming final confrontation, especially if this is going to be Jamie Lee Curtis's last time being Laurie Strode. You kind of botched it. I mean, I hate to say, just like with people critiquing Star Wars, how when Carrie Fisher was still alive, like they should have done something more with her character, Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Chewie all reuniting. They should have done that, but they didn't. And like, this is underwhelming too with Halloween Ends. They should have, if they were going to go out saying this is the final confrontation, they should have devoted the whole movie to being that, at least most of it, if not the whole movie.
Yeah.
They
and
did.
Halloween ends. Halloween ends again. No, Halloween's really ending this time. We promise. It's like you get name 5 horror franchises. Is it with an entry called The Final Chapter or something to that effect that actually ended at that movie? They like just find me
Friday.
5 franchises that actually delivered on that. It's it. Friday the 13th didn't do it. Nightmare on Elm Street hasn't done it. Hellraiser didn't do it. I don't know if Leprechaun had a final chapter subtitle, but they didn't do it. Chucky hasn't done it. Chucky is like the last OG slasher franchise that is actually still going strong, in my opinion. Like all the others, they're either milking themselves too far or they're caught up in licensing issues. Yeah. But it's just you're not going to do it. So Saw didn't do it. Saw 3D, the final chapter. As many times as you could have ended that series, 7 was the last gasp of, okay, maybe they'll actually get the hint this time. And what are we up to now? Like Saw 11? One of the biggest signs of disrespect they showed to Danielle Harris was bringing her back to Halloween for the Rob Zombie version and not putting her in H2O. Like, could you imagine if Jamie found out that her mom was actually alive, that found out where she was, and the third act, the final battle, where Laurie is starting to lose, like she has Michael on the ropes, but she's wounded, she's tired. Her new son tries to help. I could do the story with or without him. I like the actor who plays him. I always forget his name, but he plays the main lead in 30 Days of Night, which is one of my favorite vampire movies, like one of the best vampire movies ever made, in my opinion. Imagine
Faculty. He's in there too.
The Faculty. God, not a lot of people remember that movie. Just imagine in the final battle, Laurie's, you don't know if she's going to live or not, or if they're going to kill each other. And then adult Jamie comes in the 11th hour. Or maybe you could hint that someone was tracking Laurie down this whole time, but you didn't know who it was. Like someone was following her besides Michael. Well, maybe you could have even hinted that it was someone from the Cult of Thorn, like maybe
Dr.
someone
Wynn.
from that organization survived, and they're now going after her to like get revenge or something. And at the 11th hour, you do the face reveal, and it's adult Jamie, and you could do what the final confrontation from Halloween Ends, but better, where Jamie, Laurie, and their son, the 3 of them work together. They gradually weaken Michael. He can't fight all of them at the same time. They beat him down. They have that final chase that ends with him being collapsed under the car. And then you get Laurie decapitating him before you do a big family group hug with Jamie. She meets her new brother or whatever. Go home, roll credits, and the curse is finally over. And you bridged every generational gap to that point.
I would have loved that. And kind of on that note, really quick, that makes me think about, oh my gosh, that had Gerhart Carpenter directed H2O, how that would have gone. But also, that would have been such a great tie-up. But no, like, it was such a disrespect of what because also when they wanted to bring back Danielle Harris for Halloween 6, but because of the studios told Farron to do this, add that incest subplot. And even Danielle Harris, bless her soul, she knew that was not characteristic of Michael's. Like, why would Michael do that? She even said that. They didn't understand his character in that respect.
Plus, it wouldn't have worked anyway. Like she was way too young.
Sense.
I don't think her character had even hit puberty yet.
Yeah. That's why, like, she was already on board, but freaking the Weinstein Dimension films, they also ruined Hellraiser Bloodline, because one of the biggest things is, I don't know if you knew this, Kevin Yeager, who was the puppeteer for the original Chucky doll in the first Child's Play, that he directed Hellraiser Bloodline, and the Weinsteins kind of got up. They were getting impatient because it's kind of like with Halloween 6 that they ended up doing quite a few reshoots. They actually ended up hiring the same director that got him for 6, and they had him do the reshoots. But one of the things that's notorious is the work print cut of Hellraiser 4, which would have been, I guess, Peter Atkins' original screenplay. His screenplay is available like on Amazon. It's like a book now, but it's so much better than what we got for a final movie. But I will just say this, like I said, what I just want to just end it with, like, I think horror can 100% have narrative, have rich lore, that there's too much. It's been maligned for too many decades that people think it's just nothing but slicing and dicing. Like, yeah, I like guilty pleasures now. Again, horror films that really don't make you think. But one of the biggest things is there's too much stigma surrounding it that people just that they think that, okay, the acting in it, that they can't compete with dramas, sci-fi, or other genres at the Oscars or Academy Awards. Well, because they're snubbed, because they don't want them. Like you said, I think it's rigged that they just look down on this genre, and it's too long, and it's for too many years already. Like, because The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's vision, easily could have won an Oscar if it would have been nominated.
Yeah, it's like whether it got the award or not, like anyone who appreciates acting, I think it like can recognize an Oscar-worthy performance. Like, you don't need to have the actual statue to know your worth as a performer and the caliber of your performance. And it's like all the best practitioners of their craft in this industry, they know their worth with or without the Academy's acknowledgement. And it's like, if you pander to them with like, oh, I'm so grateful, I'd like to thank so and so and so and so who happens to sign my checks here and there, or it's like you want to play it that way, fair enough, that's your prerogative. I have just as much respect for actors who call out the system for its bullshit, and I do believe, like, I am a realist, but I'm also an optimist, and the optimist in me wants to believe that as time goes on, horror will get its due in future generations. Because eventually the Academy's not going to be able to ignore it anymore. Like, Parasite was arguably a little bit of a horror movie, and it won an Oscar, and for an Asian director, no less. So times are definitely changing. It's just a matter of, can we get that progress to speed up a little bit? And, we might not see it in our lifetime. I don't claim to know when any lasting change is going to happen in the Hollywood system. I'm not invested in the goings on of that industry one way or the other in terms of, who's kissing whose ass. But it's the day that we do finally start to move forward from that stigma. I personally, the realist in me doesn't think that stigma is ever going to completely disappear. I think it's always going to be a bit of an uphill battle with horror. But at the very least, I think it will lessen as time goes on. Just like racism, sexism, or whatever other prejudice you want to go for. Like, it'll never completely disappear, but I do believe it will get better. And it's just you got to just keep the faith. You got to keep fighting the fight, and above all, we need to vote with our wallets. We have to stop enabling the shit that we don't want, because whether we want to admit it or not, the people who give their money to that shit, whatever their reasons may be, you're part of the problem. I mean, it's like, I'm not above that. I'm sure I've given money to that ended up in the hands of shitty people in the industry at least once myself. It's like, you can never follow exactly where your money's going to go every day. But at the end of the day, you can control what you spend your money on at the theater. You can control what tickets you buy, and most of it will be on TV or streaming. That, depending on what memberships you have, you'll get it for free anyway. So if you want to make a statement, people need to start voting with their money, because at the end of the day, that's all that gets through to these people most of the time. It sucks. I wish that wasn't the case, but it is very much still a money-driven industry more than it's ever been an art-driven one. And hey, like, it's always been that way, all the way back to Shirley Temple.
Yeah, I was going to say that, like, had they done better with Jason Takes Manhattan, if they had set the entire movie in New York City and made it like Maniac Cop. I don't know if you've seen the Maniac Cop, the original film, the first film. If they would have done it where they set the whole film in New York City, Maniac Cop.
Cop.
Tom Atkins. Yeah, Tom Atkins is in it. He plays a detective, but but basically, if Jason Takes Manhattan would have been set in New York the whole time, it would have easily, in my opinion, it would have been my favorite Friday movie by far. I would have loved it. Because imagine, like, this final scene with Jason just having this confrontation with the New York Police Department, like a standoff or in a precinct, just doing like Michael and the firefighters. That would have been a great scene.
And basically like the Terminator police station shootout with Jason. And awesome. Or you could compare it to the shootout from The Hitcher as well, the original one with Rutger Hauer.
Yeah. Oh, and speaking of which, like, yeah, The Hitcher is another story because kind of like with Laurie, the kid, like, that's another mystery too, because I have a feeling The Hitcher wanted that kid to catch him. That was my interpretation. Like, it felt like there was a cat and mouse game. I love The Hitcher. That's one of my favorite movies too, the original.
And it is very much a horror film. Like Tommy C. Wallace said he didn't consider it to be one. I personally think that at the very least, the opening scene is one of the scariest moments in history. Like, it qualifies as a road horror movie for me, right up there with Duel and Joyride.
What about the famous scene with that movie, Call Me? I forgot who directed it. The movie with Bill Pullman, the horror movie. I think it's the long. Let me see. You know, that guy that comes into him in the party, like in the club, in the party, and is like, "Call me." Is like, "I'm at your house right now." That scene was scary as. In Lost Highway, I think it was called.
Okay, I'll have to look into that. The only horror movies with Bill Pullman that I remember, that I know off the top of my head currently, are Lake Placid, great movie, great classic creature feature, and The Serpent and the Rainbow. But I'll have to look into that.
Yeah,
one.
It's called. Yeah, it's by David Lynch, and there's a scary scene in that movie. I don't want to spoil it, but like a guy comes up to him at a house party and tells him, "I'm at your house, and if you don't believe me, call me." And he calls him, and the guy's on the other end of the phone, and it's one of the scariest scenes in horror history. Like, it's crazy. I'm
gonna look that up tonight. I'll see if I can watch it tonight. And that is gonna do it for this episode of Horror Convos. A big hand to my friend Alfonso for joining us tonight. Please remember to like and subscribe so you never miss when our newest stuff is uploaded. Horror Convos is available to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. If you want to listen to the full podcast ad-free, or listen to the stuff Alfonso and I talked about that didn't make it into the episode, remember that you can hear both right now if you go to the Horror Convos Patreon. Comment below, what are your opinions on the Halloween franchise? What do you consider its highest point or its lowest? Do you agree or disagree with any of our takes? Remember, this is more than a podcast. It is a dialogue between horror lovers. Until we talk again, good night and be well.